My name is Sahan Tenwara. I'm a student at the University of Iowa, double majoring in finance and international relations. Do you want me to stand up or do you want me to?
No, just talk loud so people can hear you.
All right. So my question is, I'm an aspiring entrepreneur. I've currently collaborated with the entrepreneurial incubator at my university to start my own company. But the biggest thing right now is a lot of entrepreneurs are sadly leaving the country because of high taxes, high burdens of regulation, too much red tape. I mean, for an example, Russia has a flat tax while the United States is a progressive one. Doesn't make sense to me. So as someone who is passionate about liberty, who's passionate about fiscal conservatism, who's passionate about, low taxes, as an individual level, what I could do to, to change the current fiscal system that we have so that, we could gain more entrepreneurs, more innovators, and more wealth instead of leaving it or losing it like we currently have?
It's a great question and a real problem in the United States because there is that tipping point where capital flees and it doesn't come back because it finds a better home somewhere else where entrepreneurs leave. And we're seeing that happen today. One thing you can do is make a ton of money and donate to freedom works.
I will.
In lieu of that, I think the same model applies to young entrepreneurs. You're seeing a libertarian trend, particularly in Silicon Valley.
Absolutely.
A lot of these guys are coming face to face with the fact that the Ubers of the world and the Googles of the world and the Amazons of the world, they're now getting dragged before the committees of jurisdiction because they want their piece of this. But I think it has to happen from the bottom up, and I think it's one-man shops that are now part of the capitalist system that have to be part of this revolution.
Absolutely.
But politics is a lagging indicator. We will do everything wrong until we've taken everything else off the table, and then we might, out of desperation, try to flatten the tax code and stop taxing capital. But it's going to happen not because the tax committee wants to do it. They want complexity because that's how they raise campaign funds for their next election. But if enough people on their Facebook page are demanding it, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Literally, there's a new congressional research study that says that congressmen now are more responsive to Facebook than they are to phone calls or constituent meetings. Go bomb their Facebook pages, guys. Any other questions? Sure. I paid him to ask that question. Freedom Works was actually born out of the Austrian economics program at George Mason University in the early 1980s. And what was different about us back then is we were reading all the leftist literature on community organizing. And we realized that we had ideas. We realized that we had think tanks like Cato at the time that were translating ideas into English. What we didn't have was grassroots organizations, someone that would translate good ideas into action. It wasn't really about politics, it was about putting live voters in front of decision makers in Washington, D.C. Today that seems sort of antiquated because this was before the internet, and it was guerrilla warfare not unlike Sam Adams and the Boston Tea Party. Today it's all driven by technology. And we have a community of upwards of 7 million people across many social networks that are hyper-active. They've all opted in. They've all agreed that they want to act. We provide different services to them. Some of them just want to do politics, and I have a political arm. Some of them don't want to touch politics, so we talk about ideas. Most want to do all of those things because they're activists, and activists want to be active. We don't sit around and think deep thoughts. We don't write 40-page white papers. Other people can do that. We want to change the world. Yes, sir.
So how long have you been a libertarian, and what's it like, I guess, since you've been a libertarian for a while, what's it like seeing you grow more and more throughout what you do?
So I've been a libertarian of some kind since I was 13 years old. D.C. And a real libertarian in Washington, D.C. is still a bit of a freak show, right? They don't really understand why we would oppose Wall Street bailouts. So when I see guys like Justin Amash and Thomas Massey in Washington, it's safer to be a libertarian and not lose your soul in Washington, D.C. because there's safety in numbers. They can't pick us off one at a time. So I'm more optimistic today than I've ever been. And one of the reasons we come here is you guys make us optimistic. Go ahead.
What countries do you see have done the best to have a perfect libertarian model? I know the United States, of course, was, we have illustrious history of how our Constitution started, how we fought the British, and how we became this great nation. But of course, other countries, have now beaten the United States, whether if it's economic freedom index, if it's private property rights, civil liberty, indexes. So what countries that do you see that have done a perfect model of liberty outside the United States?
Well, there is no perfect model of liberty, and I'm not even sure what exactly that would be. It's all of this is a process, and you're either becoming more free or more enslaved. And just when you think you got things right, you see backsliding in all sorts of countries. There's a lot of, on paper at least, in terms of good public policy, real school choice, real flat tax, countries that don't punish liberty. A lot of the former Soviet satellites have done an interesting job, but there's been backsliding. Estonia is a great example of that. Mark Lahr, the president of Estonia right after the revolution, he only half jokes about this. He had read Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. And he passed it all. He had that sort of moral authority as the guy that had led his people to freedom. He enacted all of those things, not realizing that the United States hadn't enacted any of them. And he felt sort of, he felt set up, but that's where the Estonian economic miracle came from. They're not independent enough to be able to do it all on their own, and that's okay.
I work in media in New York City. How do you have a conversation with somebody in a way, or do you have any suggestions for reading material that helps bring a conversation towards teaching somebody about liberty without pushing them away?
I paid for this question too. I happen to have just written a book called Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff.
Just got it.
And in all seriousness, the reason I wrote that book was because in my community, people that were primarily political activists are starting to ask me questions like, explain the Austrian business cycle. Well, who is this guy Hayek? Adam Smith's invisible hand, explain that to me. That stuff never happened before. And I think as libertarians, we sort of fall into this self-fulfilling prophecy where we talk about things like the non-aggression principle and downward sloping demand curves and things that are so impressive to at least a dozen people. But all of libertarianism can be boiled down to, I think, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And the attempt was to translate all these ideas that mean so much to us in ways that other people would care about them. I think liberty is really a value, and it's a fundamental human value. And instead of saying what you think with these heavy ideological arguments, listen, find out how other people think about these things. Because I find common ground across the political spectrum on this stuff. But I honestly think this was a serious attempt to translate all of the canon of liberty into a couple hundred pages. And one guy gave me the ultimate compliment. He said, I gave this to my 13-year-old to introduce them to some of these ideas. And that's exactly what I was trying to accomplish. Most congressmen read at the 12-year level, so it's a little heavy for them, but I think it's
Thank you.
sure.
So what project going on at Freeworks right now has got you really excited,
Criminal justice reform.
and why?
Because a lot of people last question?
One last question.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, thank you guys so much.